More than 160 privately owned high-rise blocks in England still have flammable Grenfell-style cladding. Those living in them say getting the promised government money to replace it is far too difficult. For 2 years after the Grenfell fire, homeowners were begging the government for help. Their flats are unsaleable and fire wardens are patrolling for safety. These homes are leasehold and there were arguments over who should pay for the work to replace the cladding. Them, the developer or the owner of the freehold. Alex Di Giuseppe lives in a tower block in Manchester with this cladding and he's been told it could cost up to £7,000.
The stress and the anxiety is insurmountable, and the fact I come home to my own home that I've saved and scrimped so hard for, and knowing that it's at risk 24/7. We're made up of 329 flats across all 3 buildings here, and over 2/3 of those are let out to tenants, and we know that they're just not as careful as leaseholders, so that plays on my mind as well. So the stress and anxiety is something that's kind of building up and is very difficult to contend with, and then just on top of that it's compounded by these costs that we have over our head at the moment. A lot of sleepless nights.
So, when the former Housing Minister James Brokenshire stepped in last May, there was wide relief.
We will be putting in place a new fund for private buildings to deal with this issue of safety and indeed this issue of leaseholders who live in these buildings, the stress and strain that they have in knowing the condition of their building, but equally the time it has been taking to see that the materials are remediated. And what we're talking about here is the use of aluminium composite material cladding, the same cladding that was used on the Grenfell Tower, and obviously with all of the implications that that has highlighted.
But that's not the end of the stress and strain for those homeowners. William Martin is from the UK Cladding Action Group and owns a 2-bedroom flat in a block in Sheffield.
Every single leaseholder in the building has to fill out a state aid declaration form. So there's about 113 flats in our building, and in the last 3 or 4 years I've only managed to get in touch with about 60 leaseholders. Many of the leaseholders do not live in our building. We've only got 5 or 6 that do. So getting everyone to fill out a state aid declaration form in time for the December deadline for the fund application is just not possible. You know, the government said that the point of the ACM fund was to quicken the pace of removing dangerous ACM cladding, but they are putting up barriers which only delay this and make buildings like mine remain unsafe. And it's really starting to get to myself and many other leaseholders. We went through the battle of getting the ACM fund announced, and now we've got this further battle. There's no day that goes by where I'm not worrying about the situation with my building, how we're going to apply for the fund, whether we're going to apply on time, whether we're going to lose our management company because they don't feel they're able to manage the situation because they're a small family company. And I think it says a lot when the forms aren't in the right format and we have to email the government and tell them that they need to release them as PDFs because they're not working on certain computers, or that there's watermarks still on the form. Ironically, when the ACM fund was announced, the government said that the very reason they were announcing it was to quicken the pace of the removal of dangerous ACM cladding. But the barriers that they have brought with this are meaning that this is not happening. And until it does, my building and the 100 and odd other buildings across the UK with this type of cladding on are still unsafe.
William Martin. Martin Boyd is Secretary of the All Party Parliamentary Group on Leasehold Reform. Martin, how many people are stuck like William is?
Thousands and thousands, unfortunately. There's very few buildings that have been remediated so far.
And is the problem these state aid rules? Because as I understand it, the rules say that governments can't give any advantage that could potentially distort competition and trade in the European Union. So could money from this fund actually do that? Could it be infringing on the state aid rules?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a particular expert in this, but law professor Sue Bright from Oxford University has been blogging about this matter for some time, and she's asking the question, you know, how does this funding distort competition in the market? It is, as your speaker said a moment ago. I mean, this just seems to be delaying and frustrating the process. We told government at the beginning of 2018, you can never get 100% of leaseholders to sign any document on any site, because there's no point at which 100% of the flats are occupied.
So they were discussing this before the fund was even announced?
Oh, absolutely. And we meet government officials privately once a month to discuss a range of leasehold issues, and we'd flagged up the urgency of helping the people living in these blocks, because the mental stress is enormous.
We did ask a minister to come onto the programme. No one was available, but in a statement we were told the government's determined to make buildings safe and to protect the public. But as this is taxpayers' money, it must be used responsibly. And if people have difficulties, that they should contact the fund. Now, as you mentioned, you've spoken to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Have you suggested any possible solutions?
Yeah, I mean, we've pointed out, following on the fact that they will never get under 100%. We've said, there are various mechanisms where they might get to 90% and then provide the money and then require the responsible entity, as they're now calling the building owner, give them the obligation to get these remaining forms signed over the next year or two. But there's no point in delaying the whole process until you've got every single person signed up.
Do you think there's any chance that they will go with your solution?
It's very difficult to tell. I know Jim Fitzpatrick, who's MP for Poplar and Limehouse, who has a number of cladding blocks.
And he's on the All Party Parliamentary Group.
He's one of the co-chairs of the group. He wrote to the department recently and asked what they could do about moving away from this 100% signatory requirement. And the minister wrote back and said, the GLA, the Greater London Authority, are administering the fund for London-based properties. So we talked to the GLA and they said, yes, we are responsible for the administration of collecting the information, but it's the Ministry of Housing who are making the decisions.
So going round in circles.
So, yeah, there's buck passing going on.
It seems an obvious question, really. Why can't the money just be given to the freeholder?
Well, there's a bit of a question why on earth the government thinks it needs to give the money to the freeholder in the first place. What a freeholder owns is a ground rent reversion income. The people who've invested in the building are the leaseholders. And it's not clear to me why the government didn't turn around and say, we'll make this money available, but we want you to move the freehold of this building over to the leaseholders so they have proper control going forward.
Martin Boyd, thank you for coming onto the programme to talk to us about that.